So after waiting just over 8 months, the day is finally here that we can upgrade our PlayStation 5 system. That is if you got into the new PS5 beta that they're running for their current firmware that supports the M.2 NVMe drive. And Sony did announce that we would be able to essentially try different drives in our PlayStation 5 systems to see if they meet the minimum requirements, which they've outlined on their website at 5,500 megabytes per second, as well as the form factor itself and the height of a heatsink that you would need to attach to it. Now, I did order an NVMe drive off of Amazon that we'll go over here, as well as a third-party heatsink to attach to it. And today, we're gonna go through the process of installing it here and try it out. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below and ring that notification bell to keep up to date on all the uploads on the channel. First up, let's talk about the NVMe drive that I picked out, and that is the Samsung 980 Pro PCIe 4.0 NVMe M.2. And this easily meets the requirements that Sony has outlined on their website at 5,500 megabytes per second. This one does advertise a read speed of 7,000 megabytes per second. I say advertise because usually that's like the best case scenario that they have. A lot of times you'll run tests on these different NVMe drives that come in lower than that, but there is enough of a buffer, I would say, between the 5,500 and the 7,000 that this should work fine. But the biggest thing a lot of people are struggling with right now, or at least say they're struggling with online, has to do with the installation of something like a third-party heatsink. Now, you can buy NVMe drives currently, but Western Digital does have their SN850, their PCIe 4, that does have a heatsink already on it. Some people have told me, though, it's actually a bigger difference in price than they were expecting. These drives are just expensive in general. Like, I think right now the best, probably price per gigabyte even, would be the 1 terabyte, and I think that's the way a lot of people will go with it. The PlayStation 5 comes with 825 gigabytes advertised. Really, it's about 665 or so, I believe. So obviously, you may want to add some storage if you have something like Call of Duty, or you're going to pick up the new Battlefield game. Essentially, if you want to load this up with multiplayer games that you may jump between, I can understand why you'd be looking around for something like a 1 terabyte, a 2 terabyte, maybe a 4 terabyte, but then you're getting into the realm of $1,000 or so, and that seems like a lot for just expanding the storage. As for the heatsink, I just got a basic heatsink off of Amazon that appeared to match up to the dimensions that were outlined on Sony's website. It's nothing fancy. I think it was like 10 bucks overall. Also, I will leave links down below in the description if you're curious where I picked up the heatsink as well as the Samsung 980 Pro. And then with those two things picked out, you really only need a screwdriver so that you can install it, which is pretty easy. I know there's been a lot made about this, and that's because the Xbox has just a card you plug in. But really, this is a pretty straightforward process, and we're gonna go ahead and do that now. So first, you do wanna remove your stand. Next, you wanna take the PlayStation 5, place it down so that the disc slot is up. You wanna grab here at the back on this corner, lift up a little bit, and then just kinda slide this way, and that whole panel comes right off. At which point it looks pretty familiar for a lot of the teardowns that I've done for the PS5. Our disk drive is here, our fan is here, and then we have a covering where that NVMe drive will go. So we have one screw here, and Sony has continued their legacy of kind of doing these fun little PlayStation screws where they have all the different PlayStation symbols around that. That's something they've been doing for a little while. Now, I know with the PS4, for example, if you were changing out your hard drive, you had one of those screws kind of holding the whole thing in. Once you lift this up, though, we can see our NVMe drive will slot right in. So what I'm gonna do now is prepare our NVMe drive, which is gonna involve me installing this heatsink on top of it. Of course, if you bought an NVMe drive that already has a heatsink installed, you won't have to do any of this, and you can just skip to installing it. Anyway, this one that I have here actually has 2 heat sinks, and that's because I actually was getting another 980 Pro for a PC that I'm setting up right now. So most of the kits you'll see will just have one. Otherwise, I mean, 2 of them is pretty well priced anyway. Good to have for the future if maybe you get another PS5 down the road and you want to upgrade the storage again. This one in particular is a dual-sided heatsink here, so it will cover both sides of the NVMe drive, and we also have some thermal padding so that it can push heat off of it. So I have the 980 Pro here. What we need to do is we have 2 thermal pads because this is double-sided. We have to put one thermal pad across the front here and the other one on the back here. These thermal pads pretty much just act like stickers, so once you press it down, it'll be on there pretty good, but for the most part, the pressure of the heatsink will hold it down, and it'll allow the NVMe drive to essentially transfer heat to the aluminum at the top. All right, and there we have it. We have thermal padding on both sides of the 980 Pro. Now we're gonna take our heatsink and drop it in. Now you can see the heatsink does line up with the little notch at the top here, and that's where the screw is gonna go so that it holds it down when it's in the bay. And we can see on the sides here we have holes that line up. So when you press this down, you don't need a lot of pressure because you can see kind of the blue thermal padding is already making that good connection. And we can see all of the holes are lined up with the threads here, and we'll put screws through so that these stay put. At this point, all we're gonna do is put 4 screws in just to hold the heatsink down, and we'll be ready to install. So we have our NVMe drive here with the heatsink installed, and we can see our slot along with several different holes here. And the reason for that is because Sony is allowing us the freedom to essentially have different form factors of the NVMe drives. And there are many of them of different sizes here. And they also labeled them like the 2280, 2260, 4230. And at the back here, there is a screw along with kind of like a washer sort of amount at the end. And this is what we're going to use to screw down our NVMe drive. Now the drive itself is keyed and it only fits one way. So once you kind of line it up, you should be able to push it in just a bit and you'll actually hear it click in, at which point you can then press it down and screw it in here so that way it's secured. And that's pretty much it. We now have the NVMe drive from Samsung, that 980 Pro, along with a third-party, pretty large heatsink, by the way, installed with it. And I mean, it's a tight fit. You can see it is like flush right up against this. Let's try this fit real quick, see how it is. Yep, it's in there, but it is certainly snug. Now, the thing that's a little odd for me with how Sony approached this whole thing is they're asking people to get basically third-party heatsinks or heatsinks installed by companies creating these NVMe drives, when what they probably could have done is just installed a very large kind of thermal padding here so that the NVMe drive would connect to this solid piece of metal here. That would probably have been enough to cool it completely, but they went the route of just leave it completely open and let the end user decide what they want. Anyway, the top cover for the NVMe is installed. This guy's clicked in. So let's put the stand back on and fire it up and see how it does with the Samsung 980 Pro installed. Okay, so just turn it on for the first time. I'm curious what it says now, because usually what would happen before I installed the beta update that we have now is it would basically say, you have an NVMe drive in your PS5, we're shutting it down. There you go. To use your M.2 SSD, you need to format it. When you format your M.2 SSD, all data on it will be deleted. You want to continue using your PS5 without formatting your M.2, turn off PS5, sure, remove it, save data, all of that. So let's go ahead, format M.2, and we'll see what we get. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move a game to the M.2, probably Ratchet and Clank. Okay, so we have the read speed of the M.2 that it has inside, which is that Samsung 980 Pro, which on the box says 7,000 megabytes per second. It's finding a read speed of 5,553 megabytes per second, which still comes in line with their like suggested amount. I don't know if that's just something with the PS5 and the 980 Pro, because even with tests online that people have in their PCs, it's higher than that. But either way, it should work fine there. So it's formatted, it's gonna rebuild the database, start up, and we'll go ahead and try to push a game to it. So I have the Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. That's at 33.66 gigabytes. Those are the game files. And we're gonna go ahead and select items to move, and we'll just go ahead and grab that. And we'll go ahead and move it, to the M.2. So let's move it and see how long it takes exactly. So it's moving now, and actually that's pretty quick. So 33 gigabytes or so, and it looks like it's gonna be moved in, I mean, that's probably 15 to 20 seconds. I mean, we're dealing with pretty fast storage all the way around with internally on the PS5 and then the NVMe drive here, so it's not surprising to see it move this quick. Okay, so Ratchet and Clank is now on the M.2. Let's go ahead and fire it up and see how it plays. So I have my challenge mode file here. I have it on resume. I'll just press accept and it's already in. Like I said, we're gonna be dealing with load times that are getting so quick that we're not gonna really notice too much of a difference, provided that the NVMe drive you are using is higher quality. And I say that, and I do believe that is pretty important, is to have an NVMe drive that meets Sony standards and is also able to, I guess say cool itself, because we are dealing with drives that are going to get hot. Like the NVMe's inside of these PS5s that people are going to install are probably going to be pushed pretty hard by the system going forward. So I understand why we're seeing people like Mark Cerny say, hey, get one with a heatsink on it, pointing out the Western Digital SN850, which at this point, if you don't want to go through the heatsink installation process like this, yeah, that's probably the one to pick out. All right, so I went ahead and moved Astro's Playroom to the NVMe drive just for fun, just to see how it would load up as well. This is obviously the game that just comes with the system, but it does do things like leverage the SSD as well as the DualSense controller, mostly to show off what the PS5 can do, and it did a great job of that while also being an awesome game. So really looking forward to what Team Asobi comes up with next. But let's see how this does with the NVMe drives. There's Astro's Playroom, continue, and as expected, once again, loads very, very quickly. Basically, I just don't think there's gonna be much of a discernible difference for anyone who is just looking to upgrade their storage, play their PS5 games off of it. I mean, there could be some, like half a second or something like that, even in like the most stressful situations, maybe a full second. But I think for the extra storage that you get, especially with how we are seeing games from third party specifically ballooning in size, like your Call of Duties, not a bad idea to look into doing something like this with the NVMe drive. But again, it is dependent on your situation and how many games you like to keep downloaded on your system. You know what I am curious about now that this has been on for a little while? I wonder if we can like pop the side off and see how the SSD feels. I mean, come on, you knew I was gonna do something weird like this, right? So let me get the cover off here, and there's our SSD with Astro's Playroom running off of it. It is pretty warm. Okay, so room temperature is hotter than I want it to be at 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And let me just kind of jam this guy in here. Then remember, this is on the heatsink, which means the SSD is going to be hotter, like the SSD itself underneath of there. So the fact that we have, I'm just gonna kind of run around here, by the way, where we're looking at this temperature. You hear the controller kind of going there with Astro, but let me go in here. I'm going to load up one of these worlds, just kind of run through here, where we will have to load from that SSD pretty quickly. And I mean, yeah, you can see the heat on top. Like I said, it is kind of warm. I will give it that. I almost wonder if you could kind of extend the top of this heatsink even to this, kind of leverage this a bit. Although usually aluminum fins are there so that it can get airflow through, and then obviously it can push heat off better that way. But yeah, I would completely recommend using a heatsink. Like, this is a situation where I don't know if you'll run into throttling issues necessarily with an SSD, but you are going to probably shorten its lifespan overall if you don't have any way to cool it, just based on how hard this PS5 is going to continue pushing these SSDs as we go along with future releases. Let me know what you guys think about this whole thing down below at the NVMe drive, now going into PlayStation 5 systems with this beta firmware being available. I'm not sure when they're gonna roll it out to everyone. I can't imagine it's gonna be too much longer, considering it seems like a lot of different drives are working correctly, and Sony's getting data back very, very quickly now from people who are trying these out. Also, I will leave a link down below to a chart that is basically being assembled now online for everyone trying these and giving their thoughts and their findings on these different SSDs, so that you can at least pick out a good option from a list of high quality ones that are already working. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.